Welcome, Internet, to a psychoanalytic talk. And today I wanted to talk about a concept that I feel isn't highlighted enough in our modern society, and something that is incredibly interesting for numerous reasons and that I wanted to talk about. So basically, I wanted to talk about object choice. Object choice is, if we had to summarize it, is the fact of having preferences on a sexual level. Those preferences are not random or are not innate, at least according to Freud. And it's something I do tend to agree with, that it's something that comes through, according to him, early life experiences are going to dictate what at puberty is going to start becoming an object choice, meaning that where sexuality is going to pivot to or who it's going to pivot towards. And there's a whole discussion to have on how, in a way, our romantic and sexual attractions are not random. They're not just one out of the blue. They are built and built upon unconscious mechanisms. And I think that's why it becomes complicated, because object choice, at least the word choice, implies some kind of conscious selection, but it's not the case. It's an unconscious one, and one that is based on repeated pleasurable experiences with the object and the self. So here I'm going to explain a bit of what is the object and what is the self. In psychoanalysis, there is the subject. We can use the word self, ego. The idea is that it's an individual, right? And the outside world, the others, are called objects. So subject and object, right? So basically the subject is going to have pleasurable experiences with the object, mainly, let's say, the mother, the father. There's going to be some kind of like pleasure within the relationship. That pleasure is wide and encompasses so many things. It's feeding, it's being in a relationship, it's enjoying moments together. All of these things are going to build and build upon each other. They can also happen in terms of negative emotions. That's something to always keep in mind. It's not just the positive, it's also the negative that is built upon. And during teenagehood, what's going to happen is the person is going to have a clear, or not so clear, at least at the start, preference for a gender, for sexuality, for a practice, a sexual experience, and so on and so forth. And those things are the object choice, meaning that it's going to be a man, a woman, someone in between. You get the idea. But sexuality is going to be kind of taken out of all its possibilities, meaning that not everything is going to excite the person, and there's no moral judgment. It's just there's a selection of something, and that something becomes a main focal point of sexuality of the individual. And it's not something that can be avoided. As Freud once said, that basically at the start the child has a polymorphous sexuality. What does that mean? That means that all the possibilities are open. That means nothing is shut to sexual preferences. But as we grow out of that phase of polymorphous sexuality, there are choices that are done. There's an object choice. And that object choice is going to determine who we're going to love, who we're going to be satisfied with sexually and emotionally, and how everything is going to start and go through. So Freud defined two main object choices. Analytic object choice, which is the fact of loving another one, like, let's say, not a person that's different from you, and it brings you something more, something special, something that you don't have, meaning that because you don't have certain criteria on your body or in yourself, you're going to love someone else for that difference, and that fundamental difference is why you're going to love the person. For example, prototypically, in male heterosexual longings, for example, it's going to be female or woman presented person, because basically it sends the heterosexual man back to the relationship he had with his mother. And of course this is very dogmatic, right? It's not truth, it's just a construct, but I just want to give you an example. So basically that heterosexual love is going to be trying to get an object that's going to satisfy us, or men, heterosexual men, like the first and primal relationship with the mother gave that satisfaction. And it's basically repetition of that phenomena, that we're going to look for someone that's going to fulfill our sexual needs, sexual desires, and that's going to create excitement. And that's where the drives also come in. The drives come in as support for that choice of objects, meaning that the drives would have been there without that specific choice, but that choice is intertwined with the drives, mainly the libido, so the sexual drive. So that's one aspect of it. Of course, here I talked about heterosexual men, but we can also talk about heterosexual women that are drawn to men. For Freud, it's more the idea of being protected, being loved, cared for, like the father figure protected them, loved them, cared for them. So it's, and of course, this is only in Freud's day. Of course, there will be hundreds of things to say about transsexuals' choice of objects and how they themselves can become a choice of object. There's so many things, and it's so subtle that I can't do it justice. Like, I know the subtlety, and I want you to know that there's a subtlety, but there's no way I can fully explain it in a short YouTube video. So anyway, that's the analytic object choice, meaning it's different and we seek the difference, right? So there's also what he calls a narcissistic choice of object. So this is not to confuse with the narcissistic personality disorders. That's different. The narcissistic choice of object is not that you're going to love someone because he's different. You're going to love someone because he's the same as you. Because basically what you identify with is not necessarily what is lacking in you, but what is in you already, or what you can become, or what you should become, or what you are. So basically, for Freud, that stems from the fact that as a child, you did not necessarily seek the mother, but you saw yourself and into the mother. So basically, you saw the mother as an extension of you, as she saw you as an extension of her. And that created a continuum where basically you seek someone that's like you and not someone that's different from you. So for Freud, and that's where I fundamentally disagree, for Freud that was a signature of homosexual love or longings. I disagree with that because I think that it has nothing to do with, how can I say, homosexuality, heterosexuality, or bisexuality. I think it's a bit different than that. It's more about how the same can be found both heterosexually and homosexual, bisexually, right? So it's more about finding someone that's your copy. And there's a lot of couples, even heterosexual couples, that look alike, are the same. So it's not a fixed process, and I really want you to understand that it's much more subtle than what Freud wrote or thought of in his day, even though it's an interesting basis. So this narcissistic choice of objects is looking for the same as yourself or as same elements, and there is analytic, which is looking for difference within the other. And I do feel that when it comes to object choice, there's a bit of both. Even though there might be a predominance, that there's a merger. You both look for something similar to yourself and something a bit different. And I think that only in the more, let's say, pathological or less rigid statements or state of being, there is a complete dominance. I think it's more of a mix and match, right? So I found that profoundly interesting as a concept of object choice, because when you think about it, we are all drawn to something and we don't know it. We often don't even know the reasons why we're drawn. We can't really pinpoint or explain the fundamentals of that attraction, and yet it's there and it's always very powerful. And that attraction, which of course for certain people is not there, but that's not what I'm trying to get to, is that basically it has such a massive imprint on our lives, and yet we do not seem to think about it. Or we think about it only when it goes to perversion, sexual perversions. Like, for example, like, let's say, there'd be someone that's a necrophile, meaning is only attracted or mainly attracted to dead bodies. Then we're going to start asking the why, how come? This is insane. So therefore we have to understand and we have to know why it came from. But what I find interesting is that often we don't think about that when it comes to heterosexual love or homosexual love. We just take them as given, and maybe that's for the best, but I find it interesting that we're not even considering why in our personal experiences it has led to that object choice. And as such, I feel that object choice is such a mystery, such a human mystery, maybe the biggest of all mysteries, and yet it's not something that seems too important, or most people brush it aside and just don't really feel like understanding it. And of course, understanding is not changing, of course not. That's not how it should work. It's not about changing, let's say, your longings. It's about understanding where they come from and why they're there. And that's already something that I find very interesting and a real endeavor. So that's why I'm so interested in it. It's just that sense of mystery that comes with it, and a mystery that's different from person to person, an individual mystery that's always there. And that's why I find it so fascinating as a concept, as a psychoanalytic concept. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.